Okay, so I'm starting with Poonam Tandon. When you explained Vijnana Vedanta and Integral Advaita, you said the Vijnani sees the reality is Nirguna as well as Saguna. So as a seeker, one must dismiss the world as an illusion or embrace it like reality. Oh, I see. Okay, so as a seeker, should one dismiss the world as an illusion or embrace it like a reality? So what Sri Ramakrishna taught and what Swamiji also taught, as far as I'm aware, is they said it depends on your temperament, what suits you, right? So if you lean toward Jnana Yoga, then you can practice Brahma Satyam Jagat Mithya, treat the world as a dream, and that would be your sadhana. But Sri Ramakrishna said, but bhaktas can practice Bhakti Yoga. And in that path, you don't dismiss the world as an illusion. You see the world as a manifestation of God, but you still you have to renounce worldly attachments and sense pleasures, because the problem right now is we're seeing this world without God, right? The world minus God. We're attached to things separate from God. So in order to achieve the state of Vijnana, what's absolutely essential in any path is renunciation of worldly attachments, sense pleasures. That's something that both Sri Ramakrishna and Swamiji insisted on. But do we need to look upon the world as real or unreal? That depends on the temperament of the spiritual aspirant, and it's up to you. Sri Ramakrishna warned against the illusory. He said that for most people, Advaita Vedanta is not suitable in this Kali Yuga. That's something that he said over and over again. So for most people, bhakti is the better path. Poonam also asks, let me come back to Poonam, because let's first get one question at a time from each person, then we can go back and get second questions if we have time. So Prabir Boshu asks, what was Swami Vivekananda's concept of God? Did he ever define God? Yeah, so again, look, I mean, one thing I forgot to mention, but it's very important, is my lecture does not take the place of the book, right? So the point is, I've only given a very superficial overview, and I explain, so a lot of these questions I might end up saying, please read the book. And I'm saying that in this case, read chapter 2 of my book, and this is not the place, I think, to go into the argumentative intricacies of Swamiji's ideas, because that's what I do in the book. And without having read the book, we won't have a common basis to discuss these things. So let's go on. But okay, in general, in chapter 2, what I claim is that Swamiji understood God as both impersonal and personal. He says, we Hindus believe in the impersonal, personal God. He says this in many places. So that's the simple answer. Abhijit Champanerkar says, Pranam Swamiji, thank you for the concise summary of your new book. All your comparisons are to Shankara's Advaita Vedanta. However, after Shankaracharya, there have been many saints from same lineage or different lineages who have propounded Maya Shakti or Brahma Satyam, Jagat Satyam, and who, like Swami Vivekananda, pushed and expanded the conceptual boundaries of religion of their times, as well as the geographical boundaries of their teachings. For example, Saint Gyaneshwar, Saint Kabir, Samat Ramdas, and many other saints. Would you also call them Vedantic cosmopolitans of their times? That's a nice question. So yeah, exactly. I mean, so Shankara is one of many figures in the Advaitic tradition. Some of these people he's mentioning, I mean, I think it's disputable whether Kabir was an Advaita Vedantin. I mean, I think most people actually wouldn't say that he was an Advaita Vedantin. So it's, right, I mean, people, I mean, were they really card-carrying Advaitins? That's another complicated question. But yes, I mean, there's a huge lineage, and different Advaitic thinkers have different views. But I didn't just talk about Shankara. I talked about Shankara and his followers. So what I mean by that is, texts like Panchadashi, Vedanta Sara, Madhusudana Saraswati's texts. These are texts which all, the basic view is that the only reality at the end of the day, from the ultimate standpoint, is Nirguna Brahman. It's non-dual pure consciousness. Everything else has reality only from the conventional standpoint, from the Vyavaharika standpoint, Jiva, Jagat, and Ishvara. But that once you attain Brahma Jnana, you find that Ajata is the truth, that actually none of this actually existed, that we are that pure consciousness, right? That's what I understand as traditional Advaita Vedanta. Would I call them Vedantic Cosmopolitans? Yeah, I'm happy to call them. I mean, whether they're Vedantins is complicated. That, I mean, I have to do scholarly research on their views and what texts they read, what scriptures they believed in. So that's a complicated exegetical question, which I don't want to get into. But it's an interesting question. Let me skip to the next person. If I have time, I'll come back to second questions of the same people. So Shubroto Dhar asks, what a brilliant work on Swamiji. Oh, wait. Okay, sorry. So this is not a question. So he's praising me. I don't have to read that, I guess. Okay. And then Pradeep Bosch is asking, but thank you, Shubhrata, by the way. So Pradeep Bosch asks, isn't supersensuous mystical experiences actually experiences available to a purified mind? Since the mind is also a sense organ, albeit an internal instrument, why would the documented mystical experiences be considered to be non-scientific dogma? Yeah, so that's a good question, but that's exactly why Swamiji argued that they are scientific. That mystical experiences are just as good a source of evidence as sense experiences, right? So that's the whole point of my chapters 4 through 6. But you're asking, why would some people not believe that? Well, because people who are scientific in outlook, scientific people are people who believe that. I meet tons of people, especially in the West, but also in India, who are really like that. They believe in science as a kind of religion in its own right. And they say that, look, can you prove that God exists through scientific experiments? And I have to say no. And if you say no, then, well, then therefore we have no proof that God exists. So these are people who believe that science is the ultimate horizon, natural science is the ultimate horizon for all of our knowledge and all that exists. And I'm sure you met people, right? I meet people all the time who feel that way, and that there are many scientists who are either atheist or agnostic precisely for that reason. They say that all this mystical experience stuff is all, it's all subjective experiences, but it doesn't have objective validity in the way that mixing chemicals together have objective validity, or looking through a telescope has objective validity. That's the main intuition behind the dismissal of mystical experience. Rekha Kalekar asks, how does integral Advaita dovetail or link with Gaudapada's Ajatavada? It doesn't. So I don't think it dovetails with it at all. I think that it's, so the way that I see it is that Sri Ramakrishna says there are two stages in spiritual experience. One he calls Jnana, and the next is called Vijnana. And the stage of Jnana, Brahma Jnana, the stage of Nirvikalpa Samadhi, where we realize our identity with non-dual pure consciousness, that's the stage that corresponds to Gaudapada's Ajatavada. You lose all consciousness, all external consciousness. You're not aware of the world. You're not aware of the personal God. You're not aware of yourself as an individual. Sri Ramakrishna used the example of the salt doll who goes to measure the depth of the ocean, but the moment he sets foot in the ocean, he melts into it. That's Gaudapada's Ajatavada, as far as I'm aware. And integral Advaita is the next stage in spiritual experience only for a limited few people, which he calls Ishvara Kotis. And he says those people can come down from the state of Nirvikalpa Samadhi and become a Vijnani. And they are, and he puts this in a different way, where he brings in the 7 planes of consciousness. And he says that these Vijnanis are very special, because whereas the Brahmagyanis they're at the Sahasrara, they're at the 1,000-petal lotus, and they leave their body within 21 days. In the state of Nirvikalpa Samadhi, the Vijnanis are able to shuttle back and forth. He says it's like a boat race, shuttling back and forth between the 6th and the 7th planes of consciousness, the 6th being between the eyebrows. And he says this is the locus for the personal God. So that's why he says the Vijnani is the one who realizes that the reality which is Nirguna, realized in Sahasrara, is also Saguna, personal God, Shakti, which is realized in the 6th plane. And it goes back and forth. And then he says the Vijnani realizes that he also sees this world, this entire world, as a real manifestation of Shakti. So this is a direct contradiction with Gaudapada's Ajatavada, which says that there is no world. That's what Ajata literally means, non-origination. This world never actually came into existence in the first place. It's only because of ignorance that we think that we perceive this world, but in fact, there's no world at all. Thank you. Girish Mahatre, if belief in God is involuntary, then there is no guarantee that the paths of work, devotion, and knowledge will get you there. Is that correct? I'm not sure I understand the question. I don't think it's correct. I don't see what the two things have to do with each other. I don't know what else to say about that. But if you want to follow up, you can ask me. But as far as I don't think the two things are related. Sangeeta asks, Pranam Maharaj, in the context of immense validity of Aptavakya, the utterance of a Mahayogi having direct realization, how would you, after all this broad and deep study, interpret Holy Mother Ma Sharada's clarification given to Swami's question, quoting Ma, your Guru Sri Ramakrishna was Advaita, and Ami Nishchit Bhabe bolte pari tumra shobai Advaita Badi. Which exact flavor of Advaita is she referring here, according to you? The world defying? I think you mean world denying. World denying or the world affirming? Yeah, that's a very good question. And my answer is, I think, okay, this is complicated. And again, I haven't tackled, scholarly work on Holy Mother yet. I would like to in the future, if not a book, then at least 1 or 2 articles. I have to see how much literature and I have to deal with here. But Yes, Holy Mother. So first of all, we have to understand the context of the statement. The context is that there were monks in Mayavati, Advaita Ashrama, who were worshiping Sri Ramakrishna in the form of an image. And one monk went to Holy Mother and said, is this acceptable? Is it acceptable for monks to be worshiping Sri Ramakrishna in Advaita Ashrama? Or should we just eliminate the image altogether and just, dwell on pure consciousness and try to realize our non-duality with pure consciousness? And in that context, Holy Mother says, your Guru Sri Ramakrishna was Advaita. And it's very important. She doesn't say he was an Advaitin. She says he was Advaita. And the way I understand this is something that Swami Turiyanji mentions in a Bengali letter. He mentions that Sri Ramakrishna, he understands Advaita in the sense of Brahma Shakti. Remember that I had this formula, Brahma Shakti Satyam Jagat Satyam. Advaita here, I take this to mean it's Brahma Shakti. Like, because Sri Ramakrishna again and again taught Brahma or Shakti Abhed. The Advaitic reality is not only Nirguna Brahman, but also Saguna Brahman or Shakti. And they're inseparable aspects of the same reality. They're just the static and dynamic aspects of the same reality. So I take it that what she meant is that, no, Sri Ramakrishna was both Nirguna Brahman and Saguna Brahman. And then she says, Swamiji wanted monks in the Mayavati Advaita Ashrama to focus on the Nirguna aspect of Thakur, the Nirguna aspect of the ultimate reality, and not to think about the Saguna Brahman, not to practice bhakti. That's what Swamiji had in the charter for Mayavati. He says that clearly. She says, so there's nothing wrong at all. In fact, you should, in Mayavati, in that ashrama, you should definitely practice Advaitic spiritual sadhana and just focus on pure consciousness. You can remove the picture of Thakur. Don't worry about having Thakur in Mayavati. Now, one thing that many people make the mistake of thinking is, therefore, Holy Mother said, don't worship Sri Ramakrishna and don't practice bhakti. No, that's a serious mistake. Now, how do we know that that's a serious mistake? First of all, there's one very authoritative statement by Swami Bhuteshanandaji, who is a great monk, a realized soul in our order, a president of our order. He has a book called Poriprashna, and in the first, it's like dialogues, question answers between Bhuteshanandaji and his usually monastic, some monks were asking him questions. And one monk asked him this particular question, and I don't have it with me now, but he gave a beautiful answer. And what he said is, Holy Mother said that in the context of Mayavati, because she's saying that, yes, in Mayavati, it's perfectly valid and good to practice Advaitic sadhana in Mayavati. Then Bhuteshanji adds, but did she say that you should remove Thakur's pictures from Belur Math and from Kakurgachi and from all the other ashramas throughout India? No. That means, the beauty of this is, think about it. If we take Advaita, the term Advaita, when Holy Mother says Thakur Advaita, if we take Advaita to mean not just Nirguna Brahman, but Brahma Shakti, the beauty of that is that it provides the basis both for the Mayavati type of Jnana Yoga type of sadhana, focusing just on pure consciousness, not practicing any bhakti, rejecting all dualism, and it supports bhakti practices, which are practiced in all the other ashramas in the Ramakrishna mission throughout India, right? Because both are equally real. There's no question of Advaita being the highest and bhakti being a lower stage on the way to bhakti. Advaita here means both Brahman and Shakti. That's how I take it. So thank you. That's a very important question. So yeah, so is Holy Mother referring to a world denying a world affirming Advaita? I think she's referring to Thakur's Vijnana Vedanta, or what I call Swamiji's integral Advaita. Apala, thank you so much for this massive and brilliant work, Maharaj, and for this wonderfully lucid and comprehensive book talk. Thank you. I was thinking about a couple of things as you presented your much more nuanced and rigorously made arguments. I was struck by the emphasis on practice that to me seems to underlie the shift from Vedantic inclusivism to pluralism. Second, I'm a bit stuck with your claim that various scientific disciplines, astronomy, chemistry, etc., have different bases or methods of verifiability. What about the fact that they all rely on fundamental theories of math and physics? And if there are those fundamental methodological changes in the basic sciences, all scientific disciplines have to change their methods. So to me, the acceptance of PP and TP seems to rely on a certain functional acceptance of others' experiences, testimonies, that to me seems like a social, collective, community-based value. Last, I'm extremely fascinated with Swamiji's endorsement of a meta position as the basis for evidence. Okay, so there's a lot here and it's a bit complicated, but I'll just mention the thing about, you're asking about whether different scientific disciplines have different methods for verifiability. I mean, you're right that a lot of the natural sciences are based in math, but biology, I mean, isn't, right? I mean, as far as I'm aware. And in fact, if you look at the contemporary philosophy of science, there's a lot of controversy about, in fact, nobody to this day, it's 2022, and for hundreds of years, people have tried to define science. Nobody has been able to. Nobody has been able to provide necessary and sufficient conditions for something to count as a science. And nobody has been able successfully to demarcate science from religion. This is not just Swamiji, this is like the mainstream philosophers of science admit that this is just the case. There's no way to define science in a way that encompasses all of the natural sciences in a way that's not question begging. So what I would say is, yeah, I mean, you're right that some of the natural sciences are based on math, but not all of them, as far as I'm aware. And the more important thing is, what Swamiji says is that for something to count as a science, it must be grounded in experience. That's the way he defines science. All sciences are grounded in experience. The ultimate verification of scientific hypotheses is our own experience. Then he expands the concept of experience to include both sensuous experience, sensory experience on the one hand, and supersensuous experience. So that's the way I see him understanding religion as a science. You have other points, but I do want to get to some of the other questions first, but thank you. Shashank, regarding science of religion, even in science, as mathematical proofs and apparatus for experiments are becoming increasingly sophisticated and almost impossible to review from first principles using only their 5 senses, most lay people rely on testimony from scientists and their peer reviewers to accept knowledge. Would you agree that this is not too different from accepting realizations of mystics and their peers? Exactly. So this is exactly how Swamiji defends TP, the principle of testimonial proof. Even ordinary people on a day-to-day basis, as I said, newspaper articles, scientific studies, history books, we all accept testimonial evidence all the time. And so Swamiji says, why shouldn't we accept the testimony of mystics as long as we have no good reason to think that these mystics are deliberately trying to deceive us or are crazy or on drugs or something like that? Patrick Alexander, Pranam Maharaj, could it be that Swamiji was teaching in 2 stages, 1894 to 1894 to 1895 and after 1895, as Sri Ramakrishna taught him in 2 stages? No, but the reason is because, remember, the 2 phases that in the context of chapter 2, when I talked about how Sri Ramakrishna groomed and trained Swamiji in the 2 phases. The 2 phases were, number 1, shifting Swamiji away from the theism of Brahma Samaj to traditional Advaita Vedanta, Brahma Satyam Jagat Mithya. And the second phase was moving Swamiji away from traditional Advaita Vedanta, Brahma Satyam Jagat Mithya, to integral Advaita, otherwise known as Vijnana Vedanta, Brahma Shakti Satyam Jagat Satyam. So that has nothing to do, or very little to do, with the 2 phases that I talk about in chapter 3. So, but it's good that you bring that up. Don't confuse the 2 phases that I talk about in chapter 1 of my book with the 2 phases or the 3 phases in the evolution of Swamiji's views on the harmony of religion talked about in chapter 3 of my book. Nivedita Mukherjee asked, can we get a copy of the presentation? Thanks for a wonderful enlightening talk. Okay, thank you. I can send it to Sarvapriyanandaji. Okay, Bill is asking, if there's only intellectual assent, there must still be a difference between those who do spiritual practice and those who don't. Those who do are different from atheists. Yeah, this is a really nice point. It's one that I talk about in my book, but it's a nuance that I didn't mention in my PowerPoint because I didn't have time. But sorry. Okay, so yes, in the first stage of intellectual ascent, there are insincere sadhakas, there are insincere intellectual assenters, and there are sincere intellectual assenters. The insincere intellectual assenters are the ones who say, yes, I believe in God. Yes, I'm a Christian or I'm a Hindu or this and that, but they don't even bother to engage in spiritual practices. And unfortunately, there are a large number of people who are at that stage and who are insincere intellectual assenters, but there's a smaller group at the first stage, which I call sincere intellectual assenters. These are people who intellectually assent to God. They have not yet reached the stage of belief in God, but they are sincere, which means that they're engaging in spiritual practices and they hope to arrive at this advanced stage of belief in God. So that's exactly what, so I think you're right, except that those who engage in spiritual practice are different from atheists. I think Swamiji, at his most provocative, he says, until you have actually attained either God realization or genuine belief in God, you are no better than an atheist in the epistemic sense. I mean, certainly Swamiji will say that if somebody who is at the first stage of intellectual ascent, but is a genuine sadhaka, is actually engaging in spiritual practices, he's much better than somebody who is just an atheistic materialist and is just engaging in sense pleasures. And that's certainly true. But if you define atheism as believing that God does not exist, that really does seem to be the position of people at the first stage of religious faith, the intellectual centers. These are people, we all, until we attain the second stage of faith, we all really do believe that God does not exist, even if we don't like to believe that. It's a disturbing thing to believe, to think about, but we intellectually assent to God's existence, but we don't believe in God until, by God's grace, we attain a sufficient level of purity of mind, and that belief actually arises spontaneously in us. Neela Vora asks, are the Vijnanis the same as bodhisattvas described in Buddhism? They're similar, but not the same. I mean, bodhisattvas are based on Mahayana Buddhism. Mahayana Buddhism has an entirely different kind of philosophical framework from what I call Sri Ramakrishna's Vijnana Vedanta or Swamiji's Integral Advaita. But what they have in common is that both bodhisattvas and the Vijnanis are not just interested in their own salvation. They actually sacrifice their own, they're willing to sacrifice their own salvation for the sake of helping others spiritually. So that's the commonality. But of course, they're based on different philosophical frameworks. Tanuka Ghoshal asks, thank you, Swamiji, for your wonderful scientific investigation. In your analysis, what are the reasons for the transition in Swamiji's viewpoint over the three phases you have identified? Was it natural maturity, or was it due to how he perceived the readiness of the external audience? That's a great question. I discussed this in chapter 3, but the basic idea is, I think what happened was in phase 2, when he was supporting this Advaitic inclusivist position where he put devotional religions on a lower footing than Advaita Vedanta, I think what happened is he started reflecting more on the problematic implications of that kind of inclusivist framework of putting bhakti on a lower footing. And he started reflecting more on the teachings of his guru, Sri Ramakrishna. And as I mentioned, it's not a coincidence that it's in his lecture, My Master, which is one of the few places in the complete works where he explicitly talks about his guru, Sri Ramakrishna, both the life and the teachings of Sri Ramakrishna, where Swamiji explains an entirely different way of thinking about the harmony of religions. And he says, each religion corresponds to one or more of the 4 yogas, and each of the 4 yogas is a direct and independent path to moksha. So I think that he was reflecting more about the problematic implications of this hierarchical view with Advaita at the top, and that's why he moved away from it. There's one place in My Master where he says, we do not want to adopt what he calls the patronizing view that some people have, the wonderfully patronizing view. He's sometimes kind of sarcastic. He says, we should not adopt the wonderfully patronizing view that that my religion is the fulfillment of all things, and that other religions are prehistoric bits in an evolution leading up to the highest standpoint, which is my own. He says, we don't want that position. We don't want to, but ironically, his own Advaitic inclusivism was a kind of patronizing sort of inclusivism in that sense. Advaita alone is the highest. Everything else is a lower stage leading up to Advaita. And I think he started to realize that that's actually a patronizing position. And that's part of the reason why he moved away from that inclusivist framework and towards Sri Ramakrishna's broader religious pluralist framework, where he gives equal validity. And he ends up saying in the My Master lecture, each religion has the same saving power. They're equally equipped to lead to salvation. Devotional religions are then put on equal footing with Advaita Vedanta and Buddhism. Sri Vaid, Pranam Swamiji, was phase 3, he's referring to chapter 3, was phase 3 influenced by Swamiji's personal relationships with Westerners? I don't think so. I really think it has more to do with his reflections on Sri Ramakrishna, the teachings of his guru, reflecting on his own, the implications of his own teachings on the harmony of religions. And there's another thing which many people aren't aware of. It's very interesting. In one letter, he quotes Monier Williams, who is a great Sanskritist, but who's also a Christian missionary, and he was kind of fanatical about Christianity. And Swamiji knew that about him. He knew his background. And he encountered this remarkable passage written by Monier Williams about Hinduism. And this is, imagine, a Christian missionary whose one of his main aims in life was to convert the heathen Hindus to Christianity. Monier Williams has this remarkable passage, which Swamiji quotes in this letter, where Monier Williams says, the most baffling thing about Hinduism is that it accepts all religions. And then when Christians come to India to try to convert them, they embrace Christians and they embrace Jesus and they say, yes, yes, yes. We also accept that Jesus was the Son of God. But we don't say that he was the only Son of God. There's also Krishna and Rama. And he says it's bewildering. And it's befuddling to Christian missionaries who try to go and convert Hindus. And then he says that the beauty of Hinduism is that it has something for all temperaments. And he divides them into 4 main temperaments, which are they correspond to what Swamiji calls the 4 yogas: the intellectual temperament, the devotional temperament, the active temperament, and the mystic temperament. Monier Williams says this, and this is in a letter that Swamiji wrote in 1895 or something like that. So it's possible also that Monier Williams, ironically, who is a Christian, fanatical Christian, may also have played some role, apart from Sri Ramakrishna, in leading Swamiji to think more about how the 4 yogas themselves can serve as a stronger and more liberal basis for the harmony of religions. Deepa Krishnan, in chapter 7 of the Gita, Sri Krishna talks about Ishvara who dwells in the heart cavity. Chapter 7 or 18? Ishvara Sarva Bhutanam Riddeshe Tishtati. I think it's chapter 18. Maharaj pointed today to the Agya Chakra as the seat of Saguna Brahman. So how about Anahata Chakra? Which one should one focus on at the seat of meditation on Saguna Brahman? Yeah, so Sri Ramakrishna would often say, people would, when they asked him about where should they meditate on God, he would often say, the heart is one of the best places. So that's the 4th plane of consciousness. But he said that the ultimate realization of Saguna Brahman, that's from what I understand from the gospel, is this Saguna, the 6th plane, Agya Chakra. Yes, okay, so now we can go back. If we have a couple of minutes, we can go back to the second questions of some of these. So Poonam, is the path advised by Sri Aurobindo more helpful that everything in the world is a real manifestation of Chit Shakti, or are these the stages in spiritual development? Do different testimonies of different mystics contradict each other? That's a great question. It's a very important question in philosophy of religion. Even if we accept mystical testimony as a valid source of evidence, the problem is mystics in different traditions and mystics even within the same tradition sometimes contradict each other. Even within Hinduism, we've got great mystics who claim that God is Nirguna. Other mystics claim, other Hindu mystics claim that he's Saguna, or that he's Krishna, or Allah, or Krishna, or Shiva, right? And so they seem to contradict each other. And so, yeah, so how do we reconcile these things? Sri Ramakrishna gives a beautiful example. He gives the example of the blind man and the elephant, that there are 5 blind men all touching different parts of an elephant. And the person touching the tail says, I know what the elephant is, it's hairy. And then the person touching the trunk says, no, you're wrong. The elephant is actually hard and scaly. And it goes on, they fight with each other. There's one person who can see. And that person is the one who can see that they're all right and they're all wrong. They're all right because they're all making contact with real aspects of the elephant, but they're all wrong in overgeneralizing and taking the one aspect of the elephant that they're touching to represent the elephant as a whole. Who does the person with sight represent? It's Sri Ramakrishna's Vijnani. The person who sees the ultimate reality, not just as Nirguna, but also Saguna. And he has another example with the chameleon. So there's one person. So most people, they go to the chameleon at a particular time. They see the chameleon either as green or as yellow or as red. Another person goes and sees it as colorless. There's one person who's sitting under the tree 24/7. He's there. He's the one who's in a position to see that the chameleon is everything: red, yellow, green, blue, and sometimes colorless. So again, he's the Vijnani. So on the spiritual basis of Vijnana, which Sri Aurobindo also strongly believed in, he was able to harmonize what seemed to be conflicting mystical testimony. But in fact, it's not. It turns out to be complementary. Different mystics are describing different aspects of one and the same infinite divine reality. Probir Boshu, the second question is, if I'm correct, Swamiji described religion as the manifestation of the divinity already within us. Can you please discuss how it fits into Swamiji's religious philosophy and in your book? This is another one of those questions where my answer is read section, I think it's section 4 of chapter 2. I discussed this. I just didn't have time in my PowerPoint presentation, but basically, Sri Ramakrishna taught Swamiji a very, very momentous teaching, Shiva Jnane Jiva Seva. Serve everyone in a spirit of worship by seeing God in everyone. And what I claim is that the metaphysical basis for this ethics of social service is integral Advaita, the idea that this entire world is a real manifestation of God. If the world is unreal, it's impossible to ground that kind of spiritual ethics, right? But if you take the world to be a real manifestation of Shakti, then suddenly you can literally serve every single human being as a real manifestation of God. That's a short answer, but please read chapter 2 for a fuller answer. And then, okay, so Abhijit Champanirkar is asking, can we understand the term Vedantic Cosmopolitanism as combining Vijnana Vedanta plus harmony of religions, both based on teachings of Sri Ramakrishna. Would that be an accurate interpretation, or are there more components to Vedantic Cosmopolitanism? Yeah, again, I mean, I don't want to oversimplify this. Is the reason why I wrote a 425-page book. The whole book is explaining Swamiji's Vedantic Cosmopolitanism. Some of the main aspects are, I call it integral Advaita. And one aspect of the integral Advaita is his doctrine of the harmony of religions. But another crucial component of his Vedantic Cosmopolitanism is how does he synthesize ideas and arguments from both India and Western philosophical traditions to develop new and original philosophical positions. That's a crucial aspect of his Vedantic Cosmopolitanism. That's the third thing, which you didn't mention, but which is very important in my book. And let me go down and, okay, I think I've covered most of the questions. Am I right? Have I missed anything, Maharaj or anyone else?
I think you've got it. And I think that was really intense. What a magnificent presentation. So, and that really creates a taste for, look forward to the book itself. I was just thinking, when the first book came out on Sri Ramakrishna, I thought that if Ayon Maharaj does not do one thing more in his life, he has done more than enough with that first book itself. But he did not stop there, luckily. He has produced this magnificent next book on Swami Vivekananda, which we are now all looking forward to reading. And he has now created the taste in us for a third book on the Holy Mother sometime in the future, definitely. And actually, I have requests, from monks telling me, tell Ayon Maharaj to do something on the Holy Mother.
The only problem, let me just be, I'll say it very quickly, but the problem is with Sri Ramakrishna, we have the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, over 1,000 pages, Leela Prasanga. In the case of Swamiji, we have 9 volumes. In the case of Holy Mother, it's harder to find material, actually. There is material, but especially philosophical material. I think let's talk about crowdsourcing. So I'm asking each one of you, if you find interesting philosophical kind of teachings of Holy Mother that you think might be relevant, send them my way. And, because that's, I really think, I don't think I can do it alone, to be honest. The task is formidable. Yeah.
Right. And you could consider reading her life also.
Yeah, of course. But the problem is with the philosophical study, the emphasis cannot be on the life. People have, it has to be on philosophical teachings, and it's tricky with philosophy from a philosophical standpoint, writing a whole book. Right now, I'd feel comfortable writing an article or two. But as I said, if you guys can convince me that there's enough material to write another book, I would be very happy to do it.
Sure, but I was thinking of, like Swami Vivekananda said about Sri Ramakrishna, he was content to live that life, wonderful life, and I read the meaning of that life. So if you could do something like that to Holy Mother's life, read the meaning.
No, I mean, it's interesting. I'll think about it. Yeah, it's extremely difficult. It's much more difficult in the case of Holy Mother than in the case of Swamiji and Sri Ramakrishna. That's one thing I'll say. Sure. Yeah, but thank you.
Thank you so much. Diane, would you like to say?
Swamiji, if I may add, our profound thanks for this extraordinary talk, and by extension, clearly the work itself. And we can only hope and pray that it finds the wide readership it so clearly deserves. And again, it's lovely to see you. And I will add to what Swami said, Holy Mother.
Okay, let's see. By Holy Mother's grace alone, will I be able to write a book on her? So I'm putting the responsibility on her rather than on my shoulder.
And also thank you for being so generous in answering all of these questions. You've been very generous with your time.
They're very thoughtful questions. Thank you so much. Yeah. We should start. We should end with the mantra, I think so. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat Sri Ramakrishna Paramastu.